I'm now live. Okay. Let's give it a few moments. Hello everybody. I'm just gonna do a little bit of rambling, a little bit of talking while we're waiting for people to join us. Hi everybody, it's your pal George. Take a sip of water, get myself well hydrated for all the talking I'm about to do. I'm so happy so many of you have decided to join me today. Welcome everybody. So, boy, it sure is a disgustingly cold and gloomily gloomy day in New York City today. And it's going to be a pretty perfect day, I gotta say, for talking about what I'm planning. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. But for those of you who are just joining us, who didn't see all the stuff, today we're going to be talking about the god of the underworld himself, Hades. But if this is your first time ever watching one of these, we're not going to get to talking about Hades right away. First thing I'm going to do, in previous episodes, we talk about other goddesses, other gods. We even had a contest over the week, and not a contest, like kind of a challenge, just to create your own new Olympian. So mail keeps coming in about that. That is the challenge that keeps on giving. So I thought up front I would share some of the Olympians that people have sent me, some of the new Olympians for the new world that has changed since 2,500 years ago. And I would also share maybe a few drawings that people did of Athena. Gotta say, folks, not enough drawings of Athena. Everybody was so creating the new goddesses, I feel like Athena got a little bit slighted. And we have a few great ones, don't get me wrong. There's some good Athena in here. And but just it's Athena, come on. She's like the best goddess. She does everything. She's like the overachiever of the goddesses. Maybe that's why. Maybe we're just like, Athena tries too hard. But, okay, I feel like that's enough of a ramble, right? So how about we start going over some of these new pieces of mail I would love to share with you. First thing I'm going to share is two new gods coming from the sibling duo of Nora and Drake. First up, I'm going to read, and what's really exciting about these ones, first I'm going to read you about their gods, right? But then they both included pictures. So you get to try to picture in your mind's eye what you think these different deities will look like, and then you'll see the way that their creators themselves envisioned them. This is Drake's god. My Olympian's name is Plume. They are also known by the name Zan. They are the god of fire, mountain animals, and trees. That's interesting, mountain animals. So it's like, only animals are in mountains. So if you, mountain gorillas, mountain goats, stuff like that, I guess. Their special powers. He can, maybe it's mountains, fires, animals, and trees. That's what it is. It's not just mountain animals. I like that specificity, though. It's like, I'm sorry, I can't help you. That squirrel lives in a valley. It's just beyond my control. Their special powers. He can stop fire and do anything with animals. Okay, stopping fire, that's very appreciated. Do anything with the animals, that sounds like, I guess he can control them, right? So he can make thousands of squirrels attack you. I don't know why I'm so hung up on squirrels today. Their symbols are flames. Their family. Their mom is a human who helps the gods. Her name is Mountra. See the mountain connection there. Dad, Ares, fighting god. Oh, thank goodness. We finally got one where Ares isn't the bad guy. Wait, is he? No, he's not. Okay, I'm because everyone's their special enemy is Ares. Ares is the dad here. Cool, I like this. Brothers and sisters. Sister, her power is that she can make pictures. Her name is Kros. She's married to, brother is married to her best friend, the best friend of Plume, who is named Nebrine. I don't know who Nebrine is yet. Maybe we'll get some explanation later. The sacred animal of Plume is bears and koalas and monkeys and tigers, which sounds like a nice cuddle puddle until the tiger eats you. Sacred plant, pine trees, and the seguros, which are the trident cactus. Wow, we got some knowledge here going on. Their arch enemy is Telemachus. I'm assuming this is the son of Odysseus. We don't like Telemachus. He's just a jerk, I guess. I don't know. And some other cool things on my Olympian. There's a little picture here, which I like that using the images there. I'm not really sure what it is, but it's a cool picture nonetheless. And here, this is a picture of Plume, Drake's god. Check it out. Looks like kind of like he's using his powers to control flame to like kind of create a swath of flame over there. Nice. So let's see who else we have here. Now this is Nora's goddess. Remember I said maybe we'll find out more about Nabreen? This Nora's goddess is named Nabreen, so it's a family affair. I like it. They're also known by the names Imaginer or Moonborn. They are the goddess of imagination. Love it already. Special powers. She can make you imagine anything she wants. Oh no, it's like mind control. Oh, I hope she uses this for good. Their symbols is a Pegasus unicorn, which of course is a horse with both a horn and wings. Their mom is Selene, the moon, Selene. Well, I guess that because Moonborn, that makes some sense. Dad is Zeus. Interesting. Brothers and sisters. Artemis, Hermes, Apollo, Athena, Ares. Gets really small there because if Zeus is your dad, you have like 11 zillion brothers and sisters. Best friends with Artemis, which makes a lot of sense because that moon connection. I love this. Arch enemies, Hera and Athena. Doesn't play well with other goddesses. Some other cool things about the Olympian. She can help Zeus by making people imagine while he fights them. Oh, so Zeus is like in the middle of a battle, and everyone's like, boy, I sure would like a flying chocolate maker. And then he just blows them up with lightning bolts because they're too busy imagining. I love it. And this is a picture of Nabreen. Look at that great drawing. That is totally awesome. All right, let's see what else we got here today. Yes. Well, first off, we did get some Athena artwork. Look at this amazing drawing of Athena. Now this is, I think this is a two-person art team. And in fact, from the letter, that is described as, this is from Mom, Molly, but it's by mostly Eleanor, who's age 5. So this is Eleanor's. Eleanor also made us a goddess. Her goddess's name is Tisi. She's also known by the names Lady Luck. And she is the goddess of luck. Nice. We were talking about how there needs to be more of that representation. The symbols is a gold coin, which is a very important, very lucky thing to find. Their mom is Aphrodite. Their dad is Ares. Brothers and sisters, Deimos, which makes sense. Phobos we're not counting here for some reason. Sacred animals are lion. Sacred plants are mint. Best friends with Athena, arch enemies Apollo. Apollo, your poetry stinks. And some of the cool things about the Olympian, they give people good or bad luck. That's pretty great. And here we have a pretty awesome picture of TC. The yellow is a little hard to see there, but nice job. Okay, let's do maybe like a couple more, huh? Uh-oh. There we go. Live art. Here we go. I wanted to show this one. This was a really awesome picture of Athena. And what's cool, so yesterday if you watched, I showed a very specific way to draw Athena, and I spotlighted on just like her head, like I tend to do in these things. But this is a drawing of Athena from behind. And it's almost like you're standing behind her as she's addressing a crowd. Because we were talking about how it's so important for Athena. She's all about communication and like leading, right? So it's like, I feel like you can't see her because she's so tall, but right beneath this, if this picture were to go down a little bit further, there would be like a bunch of like just an army of people that she's speaking to, leading them into like victory. So that's a great drawing. That comes from Anne. And I don't think it would be complete unless we had a little something from Shiloh. If you've been watching, we get a lot of artwork from Shiloh. Shiloh drew a picture of Athena. This says Athena. It's hard to see because it's backwards, but look how great this is. You could see there's her helmet. There's the snakes all in her headdress. It's beautiful. And as per usual, I haven't actually previewed this one. Shiloh gave us a little video where they perform a little song and dance. So let's hold this up to the screen. Oh, I hope I have the sound on.
And Athena did it like that. Medusa fell in love with Poseidon. Athena came out of Zeus's forehead. And Athena did it like that.
All right.
Medusa fell in love
That's, I mean, Shiloh, Thank you so much. I feel like what makes these so fun to me, I feel like Shiloh, like you're just like you wait for your muse in the moment. And you're like, I'm not really sure what I'm gonna sing, but man, when I get up there, I'm just gonna sing. And actually that time there wasn't much dancing. Oh well, maybe next time. So thank you all so much. I don't want to, there's more to share, believe me. But like I said, we went really heavy on gods. We didn't go as heavy on Athena. So I feel like Athena's probably sitting up on Mount Olympus being a little bit bummed. So I don't know, maybe if you like Athena, draw her a picture. I'm just saying. I'll show it tomorrow. So today, we decided I'm going to talk about Hades. And if you've seen the way that I've been promoting this, I've actually been making like kind of like little jokes, and these are very little jokes, about how like it's very serious times in the world, very scary. Things can be very depressing, but we're going to do something lighthearted today and talk about Hades. And people might think that's a joke, like, oh, that's funny because he's the god of the dead. But I think it is going to be kind of lighthearted because even though Hades is the god of the dead, he's actually, in my opinion, one of the most kind of the Olympians. And okay, before everybody starts yelling at me, yes, Hades is not an Olympian, not really. This is one of the great tragedies of my book series. That book 4 is called Hades, and Hades is an Olympian. That's a matter of address. Hades does not go up to Olympus, he stays underground. He lives with like all the dead people. Let's talk about Hades' realm a little bit, shall we? Hades is the god of the dead. And what does that mean? He's not necessarily the god that brings death. In fact, if you were in ancient Greece or ancient Rome or wherever and you believed in Hades, when you died, Hades wouldn't be the first person you would see, the first god you would see. You would see our old pal, Hermes. Hermes, who is the busiest of all the gods because he's super annoying, and if you don't give him a lot to do, he just creates trouble. His job was to escort the dead to the underworld. And when you were brought to the underworld, you had better hope that somebody put a coin in your mouth. Now, I'm not going to do that because that's extremely unsanitary. Also, this is not the sort of coin you'd probably want to put in your mouth. This is like it's like a John F. Kennedy, what is that, a $50? I grabbed it because it's big and weird. You'd have like some ancient gold coin, like a drachma or something. You put that in your mouth. And then you'd be brought to the underworld. And I guess there's some sort of transference, right? Like your shade would go to the underworld. And there you'd come to the edge of the river Styx. That was the border to the underworld. The underworld, by the way, I should mention, was literally under the world. It was someplace you had to go underground. That's where the Greeks believed this was. Not a lot of sun there. So you go to this gloomy, dark, wet, damp, moist cave. And there you have to take that coin out of your mouth. And you're like, ew. But then you give it to Charon, who was the riverman that at the edge of the river Styx. And Charon, sometimes he's depicted as just like an old guy with a beard. In fact, that's the way I draw him. I've seen in movies where he kind of looks like Skeletor, where he's like a hood with like a skull face. That's pretty cool. But anyway, he only takes you across if you have a coin and you give that to him. If you don't, he makes you wait on the other side of the river Styx for 100 years. Which is a pretty long time. So you get to cross over and you go to the other side, and now you're in the realm of the dead. You still don't get to see Hades. You go through the realm of the dead, and there's just these fields. It's a place called the Fields of Asphodel. And it's named after this type of flower, and everybody just kind of mills about. And the underworld was a pretty gloomy place. There wasn't a lot to do, and you kind of like, if you were a shade, that's what they called them. If you were a shade, you just wanted to have people remember you, and like, there's a scene in the Odyssey where Odysseus himself travels to the edge of the underworld, and he wants some advice from somebody who's passed away. And so he actually, this is a little gross, he actually cuts himself and puts some blood into like a little hole in the ground, and the warmth, that feeling of life, makes the dead flock to him again. This is getting darker than expected. After some time in the Fields of Asphodel, you will drink from the river Lethe, and that is a river that erases your memory. And then, after you do that, you're kind of not you anymore. You're just one of the billions down there. And you still really don't get to meet Hades at that point. And so, that's kind of depressing, right? And eventually, in Greek myth, they kind of changed their ideas about this. Because there was a few outs. If you were like a heroic person who died in battle, you could end up going to the Elysian fields. But that was a kind of hard thing to do. And like, what if you were like a heroic person who like never died in battle, and then like, I don't know, like a horse sits on you one day. Like then you don't get to go there. It just seemed unfair. So eventually the Greek idea of the afterlife changes, and it brings in ideas like reincarnation and things, and then it gets a lot happier. And all this is taking place in the realm that's named after Hades. But here's the thing. Hades? That's not even really his name. We don't actually know what Hades' real name is. Hades, like I said, he was the god of the dead. And if you were somebody who believed in him, you kind of thought it wasn't a good idea to say his name. You didn't want to bring his attention to you. He wasn't a bad god. He wasn't an evil god. He wouldn't do anything to kill you. He was very patient. He could just wait. But he would just kind of look at you if you said his name, and you didn't want him to really notice you. So the people who believed in him came up with a lot of different names, like fake names for him, like kind of nicer names to say it. Hades has become his main name, but Hades meant the unseen one. And he was called the unseen one because he had the ability to put on a helmet and turn himself invisible. Now, some of the other names he had, there's one that's very well known, is either Pluto or Pluton. That means the wealthy one, because think about it, underground. I wore actually a shirt today that had like some of the treasures you can find underground, dinosaur skulls. But like everything, like, you know, gold, diamonds, jewels, dollar bills, all that stuff comes from underground, right? So Hades was the god of wealth because everything came from underground where he lived. And it was nicer to call him the wealthy one than to call him by his real name, whatever that may be. Some other names, Polydaemon, that means the host of many because he had so many guests. If you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Polysamantor, which meant the ruler of many. That one's not as nice because that means he's like in charge. I mean, he's definitely in charge. He was definitely the boss. But like, you know, I don't know. I like him being the guest. I mean, the host rather than being like, I'm in charge. This is an interesting one. They would call him Zeus Chthonius. Hades, you may or may not know, is the older brother of Zeus. He's the oldest of all the male gods, as a matter of fact. And he's pretty close, actually, with his brother Zeus, like, relationship-wise. Like, Zeus has a pretty prickly relationship with Poseidon. By the way, we're going to talk Poseidon tomorrow. But with his older brother Hades, they actually get along pretty well. And he was thought of, like, there was, like, the reflection, like, Zeus was above and Hades was below. So people would call him like the Zeus underground because it was a nicer name than saying Hades. Again, all these things, you just try not to say his name. Now, by my reckoning, I've said Hades about 3,000 times so far today, so he's definitely staring at me right now. So we should probably take some time to draw some pictures of him. My version of Hades, well, I put a lot of thought into this. He was one of when I was designing with the way the Olympians would look, this is one of the designs that took me the longest to come across. He went through a lot of designs. Actually, at one point, I even made him kind of like he was going bald. And I'm like, no, gods wouldn't go bald. So first thing I do when I draw Hades, draw his eyebrows. There's his eyes. I color him with brown eyes because he is the god of the earth, of like the under-earth. So I gave him eyes, the color of soil. He's got the same nose pretty much all the Olympians do. I like to give him a little bit of a bag under his eyes. I think he's kind of tired. He has a hard job. He's in charge of everyone who's ever died. That's a lot of people. He has really good cheekbones. I know I say this about everybody, but with the three brothers being Hades, Poseidon, Zeus, basically they each have better, like Zeus has great cheekbones, but Poseidon's cheekbones are a little bit better. Hades has the best cheekbones of all. It's just kind of a weird age thing. Now, even though I've talked about how he's not an evil god, he's not exactly a happy god. He's a bit dour. Sometimes when I talk about him in schools, I describe him as the emo god. There's not a lot of light that comes into his life, and that wasn't even me making a pun on purpose. He's just kind of depressed. It's sad. And then let's give him his chin. He's got a great chin. Now, one of the things that took me a long time to figure out about Hades, too, was how much of a facial hair he would have. Gave him a full beard, didn't quite work for him. Ultimately, what I gave him, he has kind of like almost, it's like a little tiny trace of a goatee. And if you've been watching these, you know that I always kind of hide like a little hint about the goddess or god, like what they are the god of or one of their symbols in the drawing of them. Hades' symbol, one of his many symbols, but his most well-known symbol was a bident. You probably all know what a trident is. It's what, like, his brother Poseidon has 3 points. He had one just like it, but with 2 points. So if you look, that's actually his bident. You draw a line down there, and that's his bident. He wears his hair shaggy and in his face. My version of Hades has black hair. I'm not going to color it all in because the marker smell will make me fall asleep. There's his ears. And there's Hades. Let's get him a little bit more hair. He looks, if you don't color his hair at all, he looks too much like Apollo. Which makes sense, they're related, right? So how's that look? Nice? Okay. So I want to talk a little bit more about him. Thing about Hades, he's not a god, like I already mentioned, he's actually not an Olympian. And there's not a lot of stories that he actually appears in. Like, he's got a few myths that are kind of really well known. And just like, oh, do you see what I was just about to do? He was tricking me. I wasn't even thinking, I was just about to eat some pomegranate. Hades may be the host to many, but he's not necessarily a very good host. And, well, he tries very hard, but maybe don't offer him, if he's offering you snacks, maybe just don't take it. Because the most famous story of Hades is the story of his abduction of Persephone. I would say, it's the most popular Greek myth in my experience. Back in the day, back in the ancient day, so many people wrote their own versions of this. There's more versions of this myth than virtually any other one. And not only that, like when I talk to people now, even adults, who a lot of times adults just don't know anything about Greek myths, when I talk to adults, this is the story they always love. And it's a great story. And really quickly, the story, and there's so many different versions of the way this story is told. Do we all know who Demeter is? Demeter was the goddess of growing things. She's like the goddess of grain. It's really her book. Hades is kind of a cheat that we called it Hades. It really should be called Demeter, but we got into that yesterday. It's a little bit of a marketing thing. She had a daughter named Cora, or Cori, depending. And that name just means maiden, so she just had a daughter who was a young girl whose name meant young girl. It's like, not a great name. And Hades, the gloomy god of the underworld who spends all his time underground, would see her from above. And they never met, but he's X-ray vision, so he could see her. He falls in love with her from afar. And he goes to his brother Zeus, who was Cori's dad, and he's like, hey, I think I'm in love with Cora, and I think I'd like to marry her. And Zeus is like, that's a great idea. They do the secret bro handshake to seal the deal. But nobody tells Demeter, and nobody tells Cora. So from their point of view, it's just a kidnapping. She's just picking flowers, Cora, one day, in the field, la-da-da. Suddenly, this, like, mysterious black cloud comes rolling over, right? And, like this hurricane literally blows her friends away. And, like, she's, like, all of a sudden this mysterious stranger, this guy, and, like, 4 black horses pop out of nowhere that they've been invisible, which they have been. He was, the unseen one. He has a helmet that makes him invisible. And swoops down, and he carries her off to the underworld. And it's a messed up story. She doesn't have any say in this. She's just, like, picking flowers. Imagine, like you're, like, just picking flowers one day, and, like, some crazy big dude just comes and carries you off. You're gonna freak out, and that's what she does, right? And so many versions of this story they kind of only tell it from her mom's point of view, Demeter, or his point of view. And I always want to hear it more from Persephone's point of view. By the way, okay, her name is Cori. But as we established, that's not a great name. It just means maiden, right? So she eventually takes the name, when she's in the underworld, Persephone. Persephone means bringer of destruction, which is like metal. But so my version of the story when I told this, I really wanted to spotlight on Persephone to get her point of view. And the kind of the point of view of the book is, all right, so Hades isn't evil. And he's trying. It's like he's really old. He's learned a lot of bad habits. And when he meets her, he doesn't understand that, like, oh, maybe I should, like, walk up to her and just say something like, oh, hey, hi, how are you? What's new? Instead, he carries her off to the underworld. It's uncool. And it's kind of the story of him learning about that. And the reason I brought up the pomegranate is in most versions of the story, he tricks her with the pomegranate. Basically, after some time passes, she's kept in the underworld. Her mother, who controls Demeter, who controls all the growing things on the earth, is so bereaved that her daughter has disappeared. She doesn't know that Hades has her yet. That she makes everything stop growing. And that's how the world experiences its first winter. And mankind is like, oh, we have no food, and everyone's in this horrible state. And down below, Persephone is like this kind of unwilling captive of Hades, right? And finally, people figure out what's going on, people being the gods, right? Although Zeus knew the whole time. So let's say Demeter figured out. And she threatens Zeus, and Zeus is like, okay, we're going to solve this. Zeus sends our main man Hermes down there, and Hermes negotiates a deal for her to be let loose. And as she's about to be let loose, like Hades is like, there's a thing. She ate, and it depends on the version of the story. I like 6. She ate 6 pomegranate seeds. That means for every seed she ate, she has to spend a month down in the underworld. And in most versions of the story, she's super bummed. She's like, no, her mom is definitely bummed. And this was the Greek explanation why we have winter every year, because 6 months of the year, her daughter goes down to the underworld and spends time with Creepazoid Hades. But I actually feel, and you can see this in my book, Hades, Lord of the Dead, this is a woman who renamed herself the Bringer of Destruction. I think she actually likes being this queen. And there's no other myths, and I'll throw this out if anybody wants to challenge me on this. I can find one, because I would actually really love to see it. There's no other myths that take place after her abduction, after she's met Hades in the most awful way possible. There's never another story of her up on Mount Olympus. I think she ends up spending all of her time in the underworld, or as much time as she can, with Hades. That's just my theory. But again, that's in my book. So, yeah. Is there anything else I should draw here? I think I should draw Persephone, right? I want to give Persephone her own special, because there's a lot to say about Persephone, believe you me. But I think today, since we talked so much about her, I'll just draw like a quick picture of her. We'll do another one, so if you're at home, be like, tell us more about Persephone. I've already told you a lot about Persephone, but we have a lot more to say about Persephone. My version of Persephone, because I do think she embraces her dark side a bit, she's a little bit goth. And if you want to get into the symbolism of her mom, Demeter, has golden hair. Her mom's the goddess of grain. Her mom is supposed to be the embodiment of mature grain. My version of Persephone is the embodiment of a seed. She literally has to go underground and so she can grow and blossom. And then she becomes, she becomes the goddess of spring. She is the goddess of spring. So there's her. She's staring right at us. She's got a little bit of a dark side, so I'm going to give her some black lipstick. Now, remember how I said she's like a seed? Here's a couple of ways I make her like a seed. If you take a look at my drawing, she has these earrings that come down, and they're like roots, because she has to put down these roots in order to grow. She also has a necklace. And the necklace both looks a little bit like, almost like a spine in a way, just to show a little bit of the underworld stuff, a little bit of the dark imagery, but it's covered with more roots. And then she has a couple different hairdos. She has a couple loose pieces of hair that come down looking like roots. I'm going to draw, this is going to be late period Persephone. This is Persephone after she's become the queen. Her hair is mostly black tendrils. Again, for to say the millionth time, roots. But then, she wears on one side of her head a flower. That's to show she is the goddess of spring. And the flower, there's different flowers in different stories, but the version I liked, the flower is a violet, and it was actually given to her. It's a gift by Hades. And so she wears that flower in her hair. It's a symbol of their love. And what's interesting about these two, even though it's hard to imagine a first worst meeting carrying someone off against their will, they're a pretty good couple. It's not like the story of like Zeus and Hera where here's this couple, they had a few kids together, and then Zeus has a million kids with a million other people. No. There's one or two other myths, maybe, where there's somebody else that Hades has his eye on. But for the most part, they're a pretty stable couple who seem to be together and seem to be happy. And I personally like that. I don't even like to think about those other myths. They weren't all over the place. They were just small stories. I'm glad they exist for people who want to do something with them. But for me, I like the idea of a happy Hades and a happy Persephone. So I think that's all I really need to say today about Hades. Thank you again for tuning in. Now, if you've watched this before, you know at this point I like to throw it open to questions. Specifically, if you have questions about Hades or any of the things we talked about today. And have we had any questions yet?
So one person wrote, I heard Hades and Persephone apparently had kids, but it wasn't Hades, and I'm confused.
Yeah. So, for the most part, as the god of the dead, the question was, I've heard Hades and Persephone have had kids, but it wasn't Hades as the father, I'm guessing. For the most part, I'm confused. All right, it is confusing. Because, all right, Hades, god of the dead, I guess the ancient Greeks decided it doesn't make sense for the god of the dead to have children. It's the antithesis. He shouldn't help create life. He's dead. And that makes sense. They seem to be a couple who are unable to have kids. There is a branch of belief in Greek mythology. You don't normally see it recanted in the books because it is so weird. And it goes against so much of the other things we know. We call it the Orphic version. That's derived from Orpheus. You probably have all heard of Orpheus, right? We're going to talk a lot about him when we talk more about Persephone at another session. But in the Orphic myths, like Persephone is the mom of Dionysus. Oh man, this is hard to explain. All right, basically, in the Orphic myths, Zeus, who is her dad, and Persephone, have a kid named Zagreus. And Zagreus eventually, through like a weird thing with reincarnation and being eaten by Titans, becomes Dionysus. And I'm cutting a lot of steps out of here, and there's a lot of weird stuff, and this is why I don't normally read it, because it really doesn't make a lot of sense. It's tricky. So I can't think of any instances where they actually have a kid, Hades and Persephone. I could be wrong, but there is the weird instance where Persephone has the kid that is perhaps going to be Dionysus one day. Yeah.
Shiloh would like to know if you like the movie Clash of the Titans.
Oh, Shiloh wants to know if I like the movie Clash of the Titans. Okay. I love the original Clash of the Titans, the one with Harry Hamlin and the Ray Harryhausen effects, the one that came out in the 80s. Love, 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 even though it's not a good movie. And the mythology's terrible. It's so off. It couldn't be more off. No, it could be. Disney's Hercules is more off, but it's pretty darn off. But I appreciate for what it is. It's something that came out when I was a little kid. I love it. I still watch every few years. I'm like, wow, this is awful. But like, I love it. I love it. The newer one that came out in the early 2000s, I'm not a fan of. It took everything that was cool in the Clash of Titans and made it kind of ugly and drab. And it just didn't feel like Greek mythology. At least Clash of the Titans did that. Even when they made up stuff, it felt like Greek mythology. And they made up a lot of stuff. The Clash of the Titans, and then they did the sequel, Wrath of the Titans. I could have been watching anything else but Greek mythology. I was like, if you showed me that movie and like, I don't know, turned off the sound and said, what do you think this movie is? I'm like, I don't know, something in the Middle Ages or something. It was just, I don't like it. But thank you, Shiloh. Wow, I really went off on that, huh?
Would Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon start a war against each other?
Would Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon start a war against each other is the question. So, a lot of times, and like I mentioned Disney's Hercules briefly, like a lot of times in popular culture, we show, like there'll be stories where they show Hades is trying to overthrow his brother. And this is a little bit dark, but I don't think so. Like, Hades has literally no reason to war against Zeus, because Zeus is the king of everything now. But everything, as we talked about when we talked about Kronos, before time, everything eventually dies and passes away. So eventually, except for Olympians, eventually everything is going to be in Hades. And he's patient. The dude just waits. He has no reason to fight against his brother. Plus, they get along. Now, Poseidon, the three brothers divided up the cosmos after they defeated their dad, Kronos, right? And Zeus got the sky, and Poseidon got the ocean, and Hades got everything under the ground, and the three of them together share the surface, right? Poseidon would definitely fight against his brother. And in my book, Poseidon, you even see there's one snippet of a myth that survives to us. We don't have the full story because sometimes these stories just get lost over the thousands of years. But there is one story we know of where Poseidon, Hera, and Athena team up to overthrow Zeus. And they actually chain him in chains of adamantine, which is like this almost unbreakable metal. It's like what Wolverine's skeleton and claws are made out of from the Marvel Comics guy. And we don't know why they did it, but they certainly have a lot of reasons. They all have reasons to overthrow it. Like Athena was, fated to overthrow her dad. Poseidon wants to take over. He feels like he was cheated by Zeus. Hera has the worst husband in the world, Zeus. So they all have reasons to overthrow him, but they did briefly. And it's only when Zeus recruits one of the Hecatoncheires to release him that he is not overthrown forever. So yeah, Poseidon would definitely wage war on Zeus. Don't think he'd bother with Hades. Hades just sits back and is like, yeah, man, I have literally all the time in the world, and at the end of it, it all comes to me. Then he probably belches or something.
If Hades offered you pomegranate seeds, would you eat them?
The question is, if Hades offered me pomegranate seeds, would I eat them? And my question, are the pomegranate seeds fresh?
Ooh, I don't know.
We don't know. If they're dark chocolate covered, I might be tempted.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So, am I in Hades' house at this time? Like, if I'm, just walking down the street and there's, this 9-foot tall guy who's, huge and muscular and he's like, hey, what's a pomegranate seeds? I'm like, no, but I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no. I'm not going to offer. But I would be curious. Be like, what's his game? Why is he trying to get me, of all people, to come stay with him for 6 months? Weird.
Have you listened to the musical Hadestown?
The question is, have I listened to the musical Hadestown? Let me tell you something. So I live in New York City. It's a great place. I saw Hadestown live about maybe a month ago. I loved it. It was so amazing. If you have any chance to see Hadestown on Broadway, you have to do it. It's one of the best musicals I've ever seen. The guy who plays Hades is so... Okay, wait, actually, I should tell you what Hadestown's about if you don't know it. Hadestown is a musical which retells the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, which we mentioned briefly. Orpheus, he was he had this amazing singing voice. He's in love with Eurydice. Eurydice, when the original myth, she steps on a snake and dies. In this one, she makes a deal. She goes down to Underworld, and Orpheus travels down to the Underworld and sings so beautifully to Hades and Persephone that they let him take his beloved back from the realm of the dead. And so Hadestown, it's only got a few of the gods in it. It's got Hades, it's got Persephone, and it's got Hermes. It's got the Fates. They just kind of do background stuff. And it's got Orpheus. It's just great. And the dude who does Hades' voice, right? He doesn't look like my Hades. He's definitely not as buff. He's an older gentleman with silver white hair. He has the deepest, most awesome singing voice in the world. My girlfriend's in love with him. We actually got tickets to see it again, and unfortunately Broadway closed down. So my tickets, I didn't get to see it. Really sad about that, but when Broadway opens up again, you better believe I'm getting tickets to Hadestown again. Because it's yes, Greek myths, musicals, Broadway, and it's the best. Yes, please, put me down for more.
If you were a demigod, who would your parents be? Who would your godly parent be? Ooh,
I like this. The question was, if I was a demigod, who would my godly parents be? So in this instance, I get to choose, huh? So somebody asked me before, what I would be the god of, what would be my powers, and we came up with somebody wrote in a funny response. It was the idea, I would be, humble enthusiasm or something, and I like that. So, if we pull that idea, I would love to say it would be someone cool like Hermes and it's like Hermes and Aphrodite. But I know me. I know what sort of person I am. It's gonna be, if I'm lucky, it's Pan. It's probably Hephaestus, and the mom is probably Eris, the goddess of causing trouble. Yeah, let's say, actually, I'm gonna go with that, Pan and Eris. Yeah. So I'm like the goat god and the goddess of causing trouble's kid, and just like, hey, where's our kid? I don't know. He's probably burning something down. I'm getting thumbs up from off camera, so I think I nailed it.
How did Persephone fall in love with Hades, even with the kidnapping?
That's a great question. How did Persephone fall in love with Hades, even with the kidnapping? Depends on the version of the story, right? In some versions, I don't think she does fall in love with him. In some versions, she's this very unwilling partner. In Hades' town, I like to mention, she is in love with him. They're actually, in that story, their relationship has hit kind of a lull. They've been together for like 3,000 years, and they maybe don't pay as much attention to each other as they can. The story opens, she's just come back from the surface world, right? But they do love each other. We don't know how they fell in love, necessarily. I mean, aside from the fact that, like, Hades is a stone-cold fox. But he treats her very importantly, and he treats her well. And I think, in my version, my take on Persephone, and this isn't to say bad things about Demeter, because I love Demeter, but Demeter is a mom who, when she was young, she had some wild days. She was the wildest. Of the original goddesses, she's the wild one. So she's that kind of person who, like, she looks out for her daughter and doesn't want to make her make the same mistakes she does. So she's very overprotective of Persephone. There's a scene in Hades where Apollo is just talking to her. Now, Apollo, of course, you don't want anyone to be with Apollo, but she literally chases off Apollo. She's like, and Persephone's like, you don't let me talk. Well, she's Corey. You don't let me talk to anyone. Like, how do I know it? How am I ever going to learn these things? So her mom is very protective, overprotective. She's like a helicopter parent, right? And so going underground, Persephone is unbelievably mad at Hades at first, deservedly so. And she won't even talk to him. But she's down there, she can't really leave. And Hades tries, and he starts listening to her. And he shows that he's willing to change. And you shouldn't have to change for someone to love you, but Hades changes in a way that makes him a better person, a better god, because he has Persephone in his life. And Persephone is just, she's got a lot good going on in her. And the two of them together, eventually, I think they realize they both bring out something. Hades, weirdly, even though he has her as a prisoner, gives her a freedom she never had on the surface world. And with Hades, from Persephone, he learns a lot about empathy. So I think that's how it works. That's just my theory. Some versions, she's just like, I hate Hades and stuff like that. But whatever. Each to each their own. Any other questions?
Yeah, a lot of questions. Did you like the Percy Jackson books?
The question is, did I like the Percy Jackson books? And I have to make an admission here. I have not read most of the Percy Jackson books. I have only read The Lightning Thief, and I read the first 4 of the Heroes of Olympus series. And that's because there was an event here in New York City at the Symphony Space where it was when House of Hades came out, and I was interviewing Rick Riordan on stage, so I had to read it for that. And so the reason I haven't read his books is not because I don't like them. I don't read a lot of his books because we cover very similar territory. He tells stories of the gods nowadays. I tell the original stories of the gods, but I kind of do put it through a little bit of a modern flavor. Like, some of the gods, depending on how close their relationship is to human, like Hermes, speak in a very contemporary manner, right? So I don't want to accidentally steal something from his books. I've said this before, and I think it's a really important thing as a storyteller, and I think most of you are probably storytellers too, that as a storyteller, even if you're telling another story, an old story that exists, it's your job, your responsibility to put your own spin on it. And so I've done that. Rick Riordan's done that. Everyone who's ever written about these gods and goddesses has done that. And I don't want to accidentally read something that Rick Riordan comes up with as an idea and not realize that I kind of forget I got it from him and report that as my own idea or my own fact as part of the story, because then that's bad. So for the most part, I haven't read them. The ones I have read, I really like.
If you had to pick one, what Greek god or goddess would you like to meet?
Ooh, if I had to pick one, which Greek god or goddess would I want to meet? Now, I've said this before, and I think it bears repeating. It's probably a good idea not to meet any Greek gods. You know? Just the same way, like, I don't think you're mean to ants on purpose, but sometimes you don't look where you step, you might step on one. Greek gods might accidentally do the same thing to us. That being said, I feel like the safest bet is going to be either Hestia or Hermes. They were the two most kindly of the gods. Hestia more kindly than Hermes, but I feel like Hermes would be more interesting. But I have to still be on my toes because I don't think he'd maliciously do something to me, but he'd probably play a prank on me.
Going back to some pop culture stuff, do you enjoy the Jim Henson Storyteller Greek myth?
Oh, wow. Wow, somebody asked, going back to some pop culture stuff, do you enjoy the Jim Henson Storyteller myth stories? Yeah, I love those movies. So I think there's like 5, maybe 6. They were specials. Jim Henson, who you all know is the genius who made the Muppets, right? Shortly before he died, which was like a great tragedy for all of us, he did a series called Storyteller. And the first Storyteller was just kind of like fairy tales. He did a second season of mythology. It has some of the coolest looking mythological monsters you will ever see. Because it's Jim Henson, the Jim Henson Company, doing like state-of-the-art puppetry stuff. I mean, this is like back in like early 90s, late 80s, so it was not anymore. But he was so far ahead of the game. I remember in particular the episode with Medusa. It was a really terrifying Medusa. Check these out. I know they're streaming somewhere. I maybe even seen them on YouTube. I watched them. There's parts that are just kind of like, you know, it's weird. It's old weird stuff, definitely. But like, they are really pretty cool. And you're going to see some really great visualization. Some of the best visualizations that has ever been done of Greek mythology, I think.
Would Zeus ever actually be overthrown, since according to Prometheus, he will be?
Ooh, wow. Well, this is another good question. Will Zeus ever actually be overthrown? Since, according to Prometheus, he will be. That's a cool question. So, this is something, if you've read my book, Hephaestus, I talk about this. It's actually from, if you've ever heard of Aeschylus, he wrote the very famous... he wrote a series of plays. There was 3 of them, of which only one survives, the Prometheus Bound trilogy, right? So Prometheus was a titan, and his name meant forethought. He had the gift of prognostication. He could see the future. And he's very famous for stealing fire from the gods and giving it to humankind. That's the most of the stories you hear about him. But the real reason that Zeus tortured him, and by the way, his torture when he got caught, he was chained to a mountain, and every single day, some versions is an eagle, some versions a vulture. I like eagle because that's Zeus' symbol. Flies to him, eats his liver, and then it regenerates, and then it happens again every day. It's like, oh my gosh, it's an awful punishment. He's punished because if you read Prometheus Bound, the first of these stories, and like I say, the ones we don't have anymore, he claims to know, because he has the ability to see the future, how Zeus will be overthrown. And if there's anything we know about Zeus, Zeus holds on to power no matter what. And so it opens up where Zeus has his son Hephaestus, like bind him to this mountain to set this up for this. And various figures visit him during the play, including Hermes, who is like Zeus's right-hand person, who comes and he's like not torturing him, but he's like asking him like, hey man, how is he going to be overthrown? We know you know. And at the end, Zeus says he's not going to tell. And Zeus, the end of the play ends with Zeus throwing a lightning bolt and blowing up the mountain he's on, and he falls into the underworld to be continued in the other 2 parts, which we don't have. So we don't know what Prometheus saw. So some people have some theories about it. It might chime into other myths, what's her name? Achilles' mom's name. Blanking on her name right now. Thetis. That it maybe he knew about like the fact that like if you have a child with Thetis, that child would be greater than the father. Like Zeus nearly has a child with her. Like they think maybe that's what he was talking about, but. Personally, that would have already happened at that point. I think that Prometheus knows something that Zeus doesn't know, and it's really kind of fun to picture what could that be. Maybe something for those of you who are your own storytellers to write like a modern-day sequel to Prometheus Bound. We have 3 more questions.
Do you think it would be interesting to see more stories from the perspective of the mythological creatures?
Oh, wow. The question is, do you think it'd be interesting to see more stories from the perspective of the mythological creatures? And by the use of the term creatures, I think you probably mean what we're going to use. I normally use the term monsters, right? Yeah, I love stuff like that. There is a short story by, oh man, he was the magic realism guy. Marquez?
Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
Yeah, he wrote a short story that I'm going to give a little bit of spoilers. It's a story written from the point of view of the Minotaur. And you get this entire view from the Minotaur. You don't really know he's the Minotaur right away, but at the end you do. And the last line of it is Theseus. It's suddenly the Minotaur meets his end. You see it from his point of view. And Theseus the last line is just a line of dialogue. Theseus goes, "Can you believe it, Ariadne? The creature barely put up a fight." I love that story so much in that line that in my book, Poseidon, I included that. It's an homage, and that you can see in the notes. It's like this thing where, like, yeah, the entire story is told from the point of Asterius, the Minotaur, who's like, I have a whole theory about him. He's not a bad guy. They always say, like, he eats people. Like, what part of his makeup makes you think he eats people? He's a person. Most people don't eat people. And he's a cow. And cows certainly don't eat people. I don't think he eats people. Anyway, that's just my theory. I think Theseus is a bad guy. So yeah, I love stories like that. There's that story, the book, the Hail Siren? Siren Speak?
Wake Siren.
Wake Siren, where they tell stories from the point of view of Medusa and other characters. Madeline Miller's book Circe tells the point of view of Circe, the Odyssey. Well, not more than the Odyssey. Circe's not really a monster, but she's kind of like a sorceress. Like, I guess she's ostensibly a bad guy in the Odyssey. I love that. I love that stuff so much when people take a story and tell it from the point of view of a character you don't expect, especially if it's someone we typically identify as the villain, and we can see that they have more going on than we normally think.
There's the Helmet of Horror.
Helmet of Horror is the Minotaur one.
Also,
yeah, there's been a lot.
With a chat thread from Ariadne.
So there's some really cool stuff. Yeah, I always think that's just great. I'm always down for reading a story like that.
Could a monster ever fall in love with another monster?
The question is, could a monster ever fall in love with another monster? Why, yes. In fact, Typhon fell in love with Echidna. Or if they didn't fall in love, they certainly are together and had a lot of kids. Typhon was the last son of Mother Earth. I've maybe talked about him. He's my favorite of all monsters. You get to see a part of his story, his final story, in Hermes. He had 100 heads. Each head was a different creature. They all spoke different languages. They all vomited fire and poison. And he's huge. Like, his wings like scrape stars. He's so big that he escapes our solar system. And his wife, or at least the mother of his children, is Echidna, who is like this snake woman. One of my favorite designs for a monster, personally, that I came up with. She's only appeared in 2 panels. I spent a sketchbook designing her. But they had a bunch of kids together, including Cerberus, this guy's dog, and Ladon, who was the dragon that curls around the base of the golden apple tree in Hera's garden, and the Hydra, one with the knock of its head, 2 more grown in its place. The Nemean lion, you thought it was a lion. No, it's just a monster that looks like a lion. Probably some other ones I'm forgetting off the top of my head. Oh, the Sphinx. The Sphinx, yeah, that's one of their kids. So yeah, they definitely have met and fallen in love, or at least had a lot of kids together. And this is the last question for today.
You showed X-Men drawings. Have you drawn for Marvel's X-Men? And do you think Marvel's stories are influenced by Greek mythology?
The question was, you've shown X-Men drawings. Have you drawn for Marvel's X-Men? And do I think X-Men specifically, or just any comics are influenced by Greek mythology?
Marvel stories.
Marvel stories, okay. So, I think this person who wrote this is referring to, I have a lot of different spots where you can see my artwork online. Since this has been brought up, I'll try to post this directly on my Instagram. Years ago, I did some samples for Marvel. And the ones that are online, they are X-Men samples. I think I have, it's a story where it was like they gave me little tiny sample scripts. And one of them was like, there was a bit when they're in the danger room, which is like the room that simulates environments, and they're fighting dinosaurs. And I think I put the dinosaur part in. And then there's another one where it was like a little sample of script from Grant Morrison's run on the X-Men. I'm getting to the really specific stuff here. I've never actually drawn anything officially for Marvel. I've done some samples at their request, but that's it. That's okay. I love Marvel comics, but I love doing what I'm doing so much more. So, I don't know, maybe one day I'll do something, but for now, this takes up all my time, and it's a really good business to be in, so I'm very happy to be here. As far as whether Marvel's X-Men are influenced by myths, a little bit, but Marvel Comics in general, yeah, they're super duper influenced by it. Now, obviously, it's easy to point out the Norse influences in Marvel Comics, because one of their major characters is Thor. He literally is just a Norse god. But there's a lot of characters that you could point out that have direct relations to Marvel. In fact, I mean to the gods. My favorite Marvel character is Namor the Submariner. I'm going to draw Namor the Submariner. Okay. Namor the Submariner is he's the first Marvel character. He was created by a guy named Bill Everett. And the story I have heard, as it goes, Bill Everett was working at the comic company that would become Marvel Comics one day. It was called Timely back then, I think. Later it was called Atlas, or I might be reversing that. And across town in New York City, they had just... Here's Namor. He's got pointy ears. Namor is like super hunk. Across the city in New York City, the company that would eventually become DC Comics had just published the Action Comics #1, the first appearance of Superman. It was doing very well. And the kind of elevator pitch for Superman was like, he's like a hero of old. He's like if Samson and Hercules got together and dressed up in a circus outfit. Which, you know, nowadays we know as superheroes, but he was the first superhero. It's weird to think there weren't superheroes before Superman, right? And so this guy, Martin Goodman, who was the owner of the company, by the way, Stan Lee's uncle, he goes to Bill Everett and another guy, Carl Burgos. He's like, people, these kids, they're eating up these superheroes, this myth guy. How about you guys make me some like this? Carl Burgos goes and creates a character that we know as the Human Torch, Fire. Bill Everett gets a little bit more literal. He's like, oh, interesting. Okay, there's this mythology thing. He goes across town to the museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, walks around the Greek and Roman sculptures, looking at things. He sees there a statue of Mercury. That's the Roman name for Hermes, right? And it's a Roman copy of a Greek statue. So he takes the name Roman and reverses it. So it becomes Namor. And if you see if you see Namor, I didn't draw his whole body. He's basically just like a naked guy. He wears like scaly fish trunks. He's kind of like if Aquaman was cool. But what's important about him? He has winged feet. He's just Hermes. That's it. Like they basically just took Hermes, right? And because Carl Burgos had already decided the fact that this one guy was fire, Bill Everett's like, oh, you know, I'm just going to make him the opposite. He's water. So they became like these two characters, fire and water. He became Namor the Submariner. He like lives underwater in Atlantis. He worships Poseidon. He has winged fish. He's got crazy Greek mythology stuff about him. And he beats Carl Burgos' Human Torch. They both appear in Marvel Comics #1, the first Marvel comic. But he was published first, like about a half a year early, in a free comic they gave away at movie theaters. So he is the first Marvel Comics character. And he has huge Greek myth connections. So, yeah, I'd say there are. Maybe I'll do like a mini lecture one day on like Marvel Comics and Greek myth. That would actually be pretty cool. I think I'd do that. So we're just about out of time here. That went pretty long. Thank you all for sticking around. Please keep spreading the word about this. I'm enjoying doing this. I hope you are enjoying this too. I would love it if you guys could come and send me your drawings. Maybe you want to send your own drawings of Namor the Submariner or superhero or your own Olympians. Or you're going to send drawings of Persephone or Hades. And when you do, send it to my email at georgeoconnorbooks@gmail.com. And if you miss an episode, you can always see it at my YouTube channel, George Olympians. And so I hope to talk to you all again tomorrow when we talk about the little brother of Hades, but not the little brother, Poseidon. Thank you all so much for joining me, and see you again soon. Bye-bye.